second reading comes from the Gospel of Mark, the 6th chapter, verses 33 through 34, and then it skips all the way to verses 53 through 56. Actually, in this, the lectionary is kind of a strange kind of way that Mark's Gospel gets cut up for us to read today, but the lectionary encourages us to hear Jesus' words before and after what happens in the middle. And what happens in the middle is that there are two huge miraculous stories. That is the feeding of the 5,000 and also Jesus walking on water. The context in which this passage is written is this. John the Baptist has been recently beheaded. Jesus has sent the disciples out 2 by 2 to then deliver the gospel to the villages around. So they are now returning to Jesus and hear what he tells them on their return, and also listen for the way in which Jesus is speaking to us this morning. The apostles, by the way, this is the only time Mark uses the word the apostles to reference the disciples in his gospel. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught after they had been sent out 2 by 2. And he said to them, "Come away to a deserted place, all by yourselves, and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. And now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all towns and arrived ahead of them. And as he, meaning Jesus, went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like a sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. And they got out of the boat. People at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, most of you know David and I had been on vacation last week, and we just got back a couple of days ago from a lovely and leisurely trip to the mountains in North Carolina. We stayed at my Aunt Faye's house. Aunt Faye's my mother's youngest sister, and she owns a house in Silver, her summer home, and it's about 45 minutes from Asheville. Before we got to Silver, though, we decided to take a couple of days and spend it in Asheville and kind of look around the shops there and take our dog to the dog park and take her for some long walks. And we also were able to find places that we could feed. We could feed ourselves, and let Sasha also be with us on the patio of some of the restaurants. They have a lot of dog-friendly restaurants in Asheville, so we enjoyed finding one in particular, Mayfield's. We were sitting there having brunch one morning and had Sasha tied up appropriately so she wouldn't disturb others. And a photographer from the local newspaper is walking by. She stops and she asks us if she could take a picture of our dog, Sasha. She said that there was going to be an article in the newspaper coming up pretty soon that she wanted to have a picture of dogs at a restaurant. And of course we said yes. And then a couple of days later we went out and bought the Citizen Times in Asheville. There on the inside page, the leisure section, there is a picture of Sasha with her tongue hanging out, smiling and striking a pose for the photographer. So if you want, we've got the picture back there so that you can read the article too. But we had a lovely time in Asheville, but we also enjoyed our time in the mountains as well. I got to see my cousin, Beverly, who I hadn't seen in probably 6 years. and hang out with my Aunt Faye for a couple of days. And Aunt Faye took us to a little church in Franklin, North Carolina. It was a Presbyterian church built in the mid-1800s. It still had the rough-hewn oak pews and also this huge wooden-beamed old chandelier that had been put lights on it, but it also had air conditioning, by the way. Just mention that. But we really had a great time there. We thoroughly enjoyed ourselves and hiking, and we went antiquing and visiting the Cherokee Indian Reservation, playing Scrabble almost daily, and fixing some easy meals. We'd pick up some fresh produce on those produce stands along the road in the mountains, and it really gave us some delicious, fresh, locally grown food. But then, as always, it's time to come home. It's time to go back to business as usual, and so we packed up the car, we cleaned Aunt Faye's house, and we headed north to Huntington. And since we were heading home, I figured, and I was going to have to kind of be up with what had been happening in the world. We weren't really tuned into the TV while we were on vacation. I decided I'd better kind of get my head back onto what's going on in the world. So I pull out the local newspaper and read all the terrible news that had been happening. Plane crash in Iran, the alarming rates of troops that were dying in Afghanistan. Reports coming from an organization called Breaking the Silence, talking about how Palestinian civilians were being